Number 3. Colin's Lucky Maduane. In 1999, 21-year-old Flora Melo was a student with aspirations. She was studying at Technikon Northern Gauteng in South Africa. She lived in a building with other students in Soshanguve. She was a happy person who was good friends with her next-door neighbor. On March 3, 1999, she was at home with her boyfriend, Colin's Lucky Maduane. Collins was known to be an emotional person with a short temper. That night, neighbors heard screaming coming from her apartment. The tenant next door said it sounded like Flora was being assaulted. Then, it sounded like Flora was being choked. The neighbors did not call the police because they thought that the couple was just having a regular argument, so they weren't too concerned. The next day, Collins told the neighbors that Flora was in Johannesburg visiting a family member in the hopes of borrowing money from them. The neighbor asked about the screams, but Collins didn't answer her. Neighbors decided to check Flora's room, and they noted it was disorderly. There were blankets off the bed, and laundry was piled up in the corner. They thought that this was weird because Flora was normally a very tidy person. They smelled something bad, and Collins said that some meat had gone bad. He told other people that Flora had left a hot plate turned on in the room, and that's why it smelled bad. Nevertheless, someone reported Collins to the police. He was brought in for questioning, but he was released shortly afterward. A year later, Collins Maduane was in prison, serving a 12-year sentence for attempted murder in a different case. In a different prison, Collins told his younger sister, Cynthia Maziza, that he killed Flora. He also said he couldn't sleep because Flora's spirit was haunting him. He said that Flora's spirit would appear and even have sex with him. He then told Cynthia that he strangled Flora and kept her body in their room for 3 days. Then he rolled her body onto a mat, bought some gas, brought her body to a field, and then he set the body on fire. When the fire burnt out, he cut the body in half and threw the bottom half of her body in a nearby drain. He buried the top half of her body. Cynthia asked Collins why he didn't tell anyone else, and he said because there was no evidence that he had killed her. Collins told Cynthia that Flora's spirit compelled him to confess to her. Cynthia told their parents about Collins' confession, but they didn't believe he murdered Flora. By 2019, Collins was out of prison. He got into a fight with Cynthia's daughter, and he threatened to kill her. Cynthia reported the incident to the police. She also called her friend Nancy for help. Nancy was a police officer. When Cynthia called Nancy, Nancy was off duty, but she still met up with Cynthia and Collins. Collins said he had something to tell them. He then asked them to shut off their phones, but Cynthia didn't. Instead, she turned on a recording app. Collins then confessed to murdering Flora and even showed them where he disposed of her body. He said he wanted to tell them because Flora's spirit was still haunting him. He also insisted that he needed to talk to Flora's mother. The next day, Collins confessed to Flora's mother, and again, Cynthia recorded the conversation. Cynthia gave the recordings to the police, and Collins was arrested. He went to trial in February 2021. Court documents say it seems like the haunting of Flora's spirit drove Collins to confess. 52-year-old Collins Lucky Maduane was sentenced to life in prison in March 2021 for the murder of Flora Melo. It's unclear where he's serving his sentence. For about 20 years, Flora's family didn't know what had happened to her. Even now that they know, her family can't pay their proper respects because Flora's remains have never been found. Number 2. Mark Bridger. Mahantheth is a small market town in Wales. It was home to 5-year-old April Jones and her family. April was born 7 weeks premature. During her first few weeks of life, there were complications with her health. So she had cerebral palsy on the lower left side of her body. But she didn't let this limit her. April loved her pink bicycle, and she rode it everywhere. On October 1st, 2012, at about 7:15 p.m., April was out playing with her friends. The last time April's parents saw her, she was riding her bike. About 20 minutes later, April's mother, Coral, went out to bring her home. But she couldn't find April. Coral immediately called 999, which is the emergency line in Great Britain. Officers were in the area in minutes. One girl said that she saw April talking to a man, and then she got into his gray van. One notable thing that the girl said was that April got into the right side of the car. This is unusual because in most vehicles in the United Kingdom, the driver's side is on the right-hand side. She also described the man by saying he had brown hair, a beard, and blue or green eyes. He was wearing a green jacket or a jumper, jeans, and running shoes. Massive searches were conducted for April. The next morning, a police helicopter was searching the area close to where April was kidnapped, and they noticed a man calmly walking his dog. The police thought that this was odd because the rest of the townspeople were looking for April. They thought it was strange that the man didn't even look up at the helicopter. So police officers on the ground approached him and learned that he was 46-year-old Mark Bridger. Bridger was already on the police's radar because several people reported seeing his vehicle, a gray Land Rover Discovery with a steering wheel on the left-hand side, in the area where April was kidnapped. He also matched the description of the kidnapper. One thing the police noted was that he usually had a beard, but it was clear he had recently shaved. Bridger has 6 children with 4 women. He has a criminal record dating back to when he was 19. He had been convicted of possession of a firearm, theft, and attempted car theft, amongst other charges. He had several charges stemming from his drinking. He apparently had a short temper when he drank, and he lashed out at several romantic partners. One time he was involved in a violent road rage incident. However, he had no charges related to children or any sex crimes. Bridger had worked with the fire brigade. He had also worked in a slaughterhouse and in the forestry industry. Bridger lived close to where the helicopter spotted him. The helicopter flew over his home, and the pilot saw smoke coming out of the chimney. When the police officer approached Bridger on the road, Bridger said, "I know what this is about." The officer then asked where April was. Bridger replied, "It was an accident. I crushed her with a car. I don't know where she is." Bridger was then arrested and put in the back of the police car. On the way to the police station, Bridger kept talking. He claimed he had been drinking heavily and he hit April with his Land Rover. He panicked and put her body into his vehicle, but he doesn't remember what he did with her body. He said he was so drunk that he didn't even realize he had killed April until the next morning when he saw the news reports. After Bridger was arrested, the police searched his home. There was a fire burning in the fireplace. The officers found that the fire made it uncomfortably warm in the house. The officers also noticed the strong odor of cleaning chemicals. In Bridger's home, they found some knives that had been sterilized, and there was a boning knife with a burned blade. In the fireplace, the police found 16 bone fragments. Another bone fragment was found in the drain of the bathtub. However, DNA testing could not be done on the fragments. But some blood was found in the home, and DNA testing was performed on it. It turned out to be April's blood. The police looked at Bridger's computer and discovered in the hours leading up to the murder, he had been looking at child pornography on his computer. The police believe that Bridger watched this and then encouraged him to kidnap a child. He apparently approached 3 other girls that night before convincing April to get into his car. So the police do not believe that April was targeted, but she was just the person who got into Bridger's car. For 7 months, the searches for April's remains continued. They ended in the month of April without finding anything. The police developed a theory as to what happened to April. They believe she was brought back to Bridger's home where she was sexually assaulted. They think that Bridger most likely smothered her to death. Then, using his experience from the time at the slaughterhouse, he dismembered the body. Although bone fragments were found in the fireplace, the police do not think that Bridger burned her body to dispose of it. Instead, they think he used his knowledge from his work in the forestry industry to hide the body. Mark Bridger went to trial in April 2013. The trial lasted 4.5 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Bridger was found guilty. He was given life imprisonment with a whole life order, which is equivalent to life without parole. In 2015, it was revealed that Bridger believes he is haunted by a ghost that he thinks is April Jones. He told another inmate that the 5-year-old's ghost visits him at night. Her ghost is brought into his cell by an older spirit. The other inmate said that Bridger was visibly upset by the ghostly visits. April's mother, Carl, said that she hopes April's ghost torments Bridger for the rest of his life and gives him hell. April Jones' remains have never been found. Mark Bridger maintains her death was an accident and there was no sexual assault. Unless something drastic happens to his sentence, Bridger will die in prison. April's family is hoping he will reveal the location of her remains. Perhaps April's ghost will convince him to give up the location of her remains. Number 1. Terry Childs. In 1979, Linda Ann Josevic was a student at De Anza College in Cupertino, California. She was interested in athletics. She also worked as a sales clerk at Mervyn's department store in Santa Clara, California. On November 7, 1979, Josevic told her coworker that she was going to her car in the parking lot to get some change. She wanted to use a payphone to call a friend about going to a movie. She never returned from her break. Hundreds of people searched for her. Josevic's ransacked car was found a few days later. Although no body had been found, the investigators thought that Josevic had been murdered. But they exhausted all their leads and they didn't know who did it or what happened. So the case went cold. It stayed that way for 16 years. Then, in 1995, a man was foraging for mushrooms in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He came across human ribs and a jawbone. They belonged to Linda Ann Josevic. 9 years later, in 2004, her skull and upper jaw were found not far from the other remains. But Josevic's family would have to wait 3 more years to find out what happened to her. In 2007, 28 years after Linda Ann Josevic went missing, 52-year-old Terry Childs was serving time in prison for murder at the Salinas Valley State Prison. Out of the blue, Childs confessed to murdering Linda Ann Josevic. He said that Josevic's spirit haunted him in his prison cell. He said she would just stare at him. He told detectives that her death was eating up his brain and he had to confess to free himself of his demons. Childs explained on the night he killed Josevic, he got into a fight with his mother and was angry, so he left home. He came across Josevic in the parking lot of her work at around 7 p.m. He shoved her into her car, beat her, and drove her to the mountains, where he strangled and stabbed her. A few days later, he returned to her body and covered it with leaves. Finally, after almost 3 decades, the Josevic family knew who was responsible for her murder. Childs said that after he confessed, Josevic's spirit stopped haunting him. When Childs confessed to killing Linda Ann Josevic, he was serving time for the murders of 32-year-old Rulon McGill and 17-year-old Janine Singala, who was also known as Lois Singala. In 1979, Rulon McGill was a teacher in Winnemucca, Nevada. She was married and had a 3-year-old daughter. On July 10th, she went to Reno for a dentist appointment and to do some shopping. She never returned home. 2 days later, her body was found in a drainage ditch. She was nude and she had been sexually assaulted. She had been stabbed to death. Her murder remained unsolved until Terry Childs confessed to killing her in 1997. He said that he came across McGill and it looked like she had money, so he followed her to her car. He knocked her down and held her at knife point. Then he ordered her to get into the car and drive with him in the passenger seat. Childs said that he was using methamphetamine and PCP at the time. He raped her and stabbed her to death. He said he killed McGill so she wouldn't identify him. Childs was charged with McGill's murder and he pleaded guilty in June 1998. He was sentenced to life in prison. When Childs confessed to McGill's murder, he was already serving a 41-year sentence for murdering Janine Singala. On August 5, 1987, Childs brought Janine Singala to a hillside in Scotts Valley, California. Childs said he had been awake and on drugs for several days. He shot Singala 15 times in the arm, stomach, back, thigh, and head. Childs said that he killed Singala because she knew he stole cocaine a month earlier and he was afraid she was a police informant. Singala had lived on and off with people, including Childs. Childs' girlfriend, Melanie Lee Hereford, was there when Childs murdered Singala. Childs threatened to kill Hereford and her niece if she went to the police, so she didn't. The police ended up arresting Childs and Hereford on an unrelated charge for possessing an explosive device while they were investigating her killing. Later, they were charged in connection with Singala's murder. Hereford accepted a plea deal, and she was charged with being an accessory to murder in exchange for testifying against Childs in court. The trial began in January 1987. Hereford said she was still haunted by Singala's screams. A month later, Childs was found guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 41 years in prison. Of course, at the time, the authorities had no idea that they were locking up a serial killer. He may have also killed many more people than the 3 we mentioned. In 1997, Childs told the police he could clear up 6 murders in California, 2 in Tennessee, and 2 in Seattle, Washington. Childs wanted a plea deal. If he confessed to more murders, he wanted to avoid the death penalty, and he wanted to be shipped out of California. Prosecutors refused the deal. Nevertheless, in 2017, Childs pleaded guilty to 2 murders he said he could clear up. On October 11, 1984, the body of 28-year-old Joan Mack was found on Beer Can Beach in Aptos, an unincorporated town in Santa Cruz County, California. She had been bound, gagged, and stabbed to death. On February 3, 1985, Christopher Hall was shot to death in San Lorenzo Park in Southern California. For the 2 murders, Childs was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the chance of parole. The police said that Childs may have killed at least 25 people. 66-year-old Terry Childs is currently incarcerated at the California State Prison. He will likely die before he gets out. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.